Heavy showers developing here. Later on in the afternoon, temperatures rising to around 20 or 21 degrees. A little cooler further north under the cloud, particularly Northern Ireland, southern Scotland here, around about 13 or 14 Celsius. A murky start once more on Wednesday, but fog patches lifting and then dry for most. Plenty of sunny spells, perhaps some low cloud just lingering around some coastal areas, but feeling warm in that sunshine as temperatures start to lift further, and more sunshine on the way to end the week as well as temperatures rise towards the mid-20s.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxt boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner with the latest. The M90 in Fife is blocked southbound from junction 1C to 1B towards Ferry Toll due to a police investigation. And in Tyne and Wear, the A19, the Tyne Tunnel is closed both ways to east of Newcastle due to an ongoing investigation inside the tunnel. West Yorkshire, the M606 is blocked both ways to junction 3 south of Bradford because of flooding at the Staygate roundabout. And the M5 is being held northbound just after junction 2, the Oldbury exit, due to an obstruction causing queues. The Surrey stretch of the M25 remains shut anti-clockwise from junction 7 to 6 in the M23 and Godstone. They're recovering a car that caught fire and left a spillage across the motorway, causing queues back to 8 at Reigate. And on the M4 in Berkshire, the two left lanes are closed eastbound just after 8, the Maidenhead exit, for a police investigation. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. But you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. 2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. I've been talking about it for some time. I believe sectarian politics is here to stay. I shall debate that with a senior journalist and representatives of the Labour and Conservative parties. We'll also look at how Labour did the other evening. Was it just a little bit disappointing, even though on the face of it, it appeared to be a rout? And let's have a happy story on this bank holiday Monday, despite the rain. A boost for pubs, yes, as Heineken promised to put £39 million into 600 pubs up and down the country. At least somebody hasn't given up on the British boozer. But before all of that, let's get the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Nigel, and good evening to you. Our top stories tonight. We start with some breaking news. Israel has rejected a ceasefire deal which Hamas claims to have agreed with Egyptian mediators. But it says they're exhausting every possibility regarding negotiations. An Israeli official described the proposed deal as softened and said it was a ruse intended to make Israel look bad. Hamas claims it meets several demands, including the return of displaced people and a prisoner swap. It comes after Israel ordered the evacuation of parts of Rafah ahead of a large-scale military offensive. There's been no successful agreement on a ceasefire in Gaza since a week-long pause in November. Rishi Sunak says he's determined to fight, and the general election is not a foregone conclusion. The Prime Minister is calling for unity among Tory MPs after saying that he believes Britain could be heading for a hung parliament. The Conservatives lost hundreds of council seats and the West Midlands mayoralty, results Rishi Sunak described as bitterly disappointing. But he says he's not giving up.
What the independent analysis shows that whilst of course this was a disappointing weekend for us, that the result of the next general election isn't a foregone conclusion, and indeed actually is closer than, or the situation is closer than many people are saying, or indeed some of the opinion polls are predicting. And that's why I'm absolutely determined to fight incredibly hard for what I believe and for the future country that I want to build, and that's what I'm going to do.
Well, Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey says he'll table a motion of no confidence in the government in an effort to pressure Rishi Sunak to call a June general election. Sir Ed claims that the disastrous local election results show the country has, in his words, had enough of Rishi Sunak and his out-of-touch government. The motion will be tabled when Parliament returns tomorrow. New SNP leader John Swinney says he'll seek to build a coalition of the willing to focus on Scotland's problems, but won't resurrect the power-sharing deal that they had with the Scottish Greens. In his acceptance speech, Mr Swinney called for unity and said that the polarisation of politics does not serve the country well. Mr Swinney's appointment was unopposed, and he's expected to be voted in as Scotland's new First Minister later on this week. Well, in the United States, Donald Trump has been fined and threatened with jail by the judge in his hush money trial. The former US president has been ordered to pay $1,000 for violating a gag order. It prohibits him from making public comments about jurors, witnesses, and the families of the judge and Trump's prosecutors. Judge Juan Merchan described Mr Trump's actions as willful, and he's warned him that he could face jail as the fines don't appear to be working. And finally, gun salutes have rung out across the capital, marking the first anniversary of King Charles's coronation. A 62-gun salute rang out from Tower Wharf. 41 volleys were fired earlier by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery in Green Park in central London. The Archbishop of Canterbury has paid tribute to the King's sense of duty after his return to public life and says that crowning him was the privilege of a lifetime. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, back to Nigel.
Good evening. Well, whilst I was away in America, of course, we had a big set of elections that took place last Thursday. Quite why it takes until Saturday night to count them all, I have absolutely no idea. What is the upshot of it all? Well, the Conservatives did pretty much as badly as expected, down by nearly 500 council seats, which was pretty much what was expected. They lost nearly 50% of the seats that they held prior to the election. Why? Well, in the seats where Reform stood, a significant number are going to Reform, and we certainly saw that in the Blackpool South by-election, with Reform coming just 117 votes behind the Conservatives, albeit with Labour way out in front. There are also Conservatives going back to Labour. These are the old red wall voters, Brexiteer red wall voters going back to the Labour Party, but also a lot of Conservatives simply staying at home. They're pretty disgusted with the last 14 years. For Labour, on the face of it, well, they won nearly all of the mayoral races bar one. Ben Houchen managed to hang on up in Teesside, albeit with a vote share that was down by 20%. And they'll certainly be pleased to have won the West Midlands from the Conservatives, Andy Street. So a good night for Labour, but not exactly overwhelming. Didn't exactly feel like Tony Blair in 1997. As for reform, well, they only stood in 15% of seats. I think what they did prove is they don't have much of a machine on the ground, but that the polls are right. Because across the 300 seats in which they stood, they averaged 12%, with, as I say, nearly 17% in Blackpool South. So there is a reform vote there. Of that, there's no doubt. But to me, the really big feature, well, I've been talking about it for months on this show, the growth of sectarian politics. I said to all of you that George Galloway's win in that Rochdale by-election was not a one-off. Let's have a look at some of the scenes that we witnessed last Thursday night into Friday.
Raise the voice of Palestine! Allahu Akbar!
I'm going to tell you something here. This is a clear message to Starmer. Bradford has rejected Labour. It's rejected Zionism. And this is a message to you, Nash Shah and Imran Hussein. We are coming for you in the general election. Anyone that stands with Zionism, we're coming after you. Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
Well, anyone that supports Zionism, they are coming to get. I hope that just means in electoral terms, although I'm not, given the tone of that gentleman's manner, entirely sure. And let's see some of the scenes of celebration. And this is what you see everywhere. You know, there were about 40 council seats won by people standing on a Gaza agenda. Some stood for the Green Party, some stood for Galloway, some stood as independents. And this all took place in areas that are Muslim-majority wards. If that's not a sectarian vote, I don't know what is. How many women can you see in that picture? Absolutely none. And we now go to Burnley, and just watch this in Burnley, please. Well, what can you say? This is our country in 2024. This is the diversity agenda. Is this what you intended, Peter Mandelson? You said you wanted to open up, you wanted to change the country. Well, you did it with mass immigration. But don't think the Tories get off on this one. Do you know, in 2023, 250,000 people settled in this country from the Indian subcontinent. And what you can see is that if people come in very, very large numbers, they bring their culture with them. And what we're witnessing with this growth of sectarian politics is an attempt to take over councils, is an attempt to win seats in the British Parliament. And over the last couple of days, the organisation called Muslim Vote, that we've highlighted here on this show before, have put out 18 demands to Keir Starmer. Things such as he must ensure that Sharia-compliant pensions are available at every workplace. It's a list of 18 demands, and you know what? If Keir Starmer met those 18 demands, they'd come back with 18 more. So my question tonight, is sectarian politics here to stay? I believe that it is. I believe that by the time of the 2029 general election, given the population explosion that is going on within those communities, it will be a significant factor. Ultimately, it will hurt Labour far more than it will hurt the Conservative Party. Love your thoughts, please. Farage@gbnews.com. Well, somebody who's been aware of this issue for quite a number of years is veteran journalist Trevor Kavanagh, associate editor of The Sun newspaper. Trevor, you've written about the problems of integration. You've talked about this many times over the years. It looks like your worst fears are coming true.
I think they've come true, frankly. It's not coming, it's here. And what we've seen in those clips is deeply alarming, ugly, and in fact quite sinister. Because the anger that you alluded to, the fury of these people as they leap up and down in exaltation at their victories over what I think is a victory over the democratic process, using and hijacking parties like the Green Party in order to get across the views on Gaza, nothing whatsoever to do with the people who live in Leeds. I think this is just the beginning of the visible side of this. This has been going on for quite a long time in in areas which have become Muslim ghettos almost, and Tower Hamlets is one of the ones just down the road from us here in London. But there are many, many more where votes are not actually delivered to the ballot box by the electors, but by the people, the imams, the people who bundle them up in carry bags, as you know.
And this is the abuse of the postal voting system.
Yes, it should be scrapped straight away.
Yeah.
All votes should be in person.
There is an irony here, Trevor. There's not been an election in Gaza for almost 20 years, and yet here we are in English local elections voting on Gaza. But it's about more than Gaza, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's about the adoption of a whole range of things, from Sharia law, as you say, from Sharia financing, which are in fact alien to the capitalist system that we have here, the democratic system, really, of business being done. But it's also grasping, putting the feelers out into the areas of power, where the levers of power are. You're now getting overt indications of people seeking to influence events, which, if they're actually using a market gardener in Leeds representing the Green Party to try and manipulate national government policy on foreign affairs, you can only begin to imagine where else they might go.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I'm joined down the line by Mohammed Amin, the former chairman of the Conservative Muslim Forum.
Good evening,
Mohammed,
Nigel.
Good evening. Welcome back to the programme. I guess when you see a poll 3 weeks ago that shows that 46% of British Muslims support Hamas, a terrorist organisation, a proscribed organisation, when you look at that, I guess these results in our inner cities are not that surprising.
Well, first of all, you and I met and talked about that poll a few weeks ago, and I think the poll had many deficiencies, but let's not go into that now. As far as what we're seeing this weekend, passions amongst some British Muslims are running understandably high, given what they see happening every day in Gaza. However, what they need to remember is that local councils do not deal in foreign policy. And I think what's been happening in terms of people standing on a Gaza ticket when they're running for the local council is self-defeating, fruitless. I can understand people feeling passionate about it, but frankly, they're wasting their time.
Well, they may be wasting their time, but I think what they're doing is building up a power base so that they can win members of parliament. And they might get one or two this time round. They might get a lot in 2029 if people continue to vote on religious lines. Now, the point I was making a moment ago, Mohammed, is actually the Conservatives are as guilty, if not more guilty, with irresponsible, open-door policies to the subcontinent. And it's that culture we're seeing playing out on our streets.
Well, the people who were arriving in 2023 from the Indian subcontinent are, by and large, highly educated people, because we have very tough visa requirements in terms of what you need to be able to earn to get a visa to immigrate from anywhere in the world now. So well, I think it's entirely wrong.
No. That's not true. That's not true, is it? Actually, what this government did was lower the bar in terms of what you had to earn. We've promised now to put it back up again. And also, a lot of these numbers are through family reunions, aren't they?
Well, some of them will be through family reunions. But the key point is that with every year that goes by, first of all, the immigrant population generally and Muslims in particular are dispersing around the country. People do not, in general, vote by religious groupings, and I will be astonished if we get even one MP at the next general election who is elected because they're standing on a religious ticket, unless it's George Galloway. I don't expect even George Galloway to hold his seat next time, frankly.
All right, well, I think you may be in denial, but you're confident that the Muslim population will become anglicised and vote on similar issues along similar lines to the existing population. Is that what you're saying?
Everything that we've seen about how Muslims vote for the last 20 years, the issues that they consider important when they actually go to the ballot box, the parties that they vote for, indicates that they, with every year that goes by, they become more and more mainstream political voters.
All right, Mohammed Amin, thank you very much indeed. Folks at home, never let it be said we don't let you hear both sides of every argument, because we do. Trevor Kavanagh, your column, your Monday column in The Sun, which I have to say I always read, a lot of people do. You were talking today about these two academics, Rallings and Thrasher, very well-respected people, and they do full analyses of upcoming elections and results, and they do it jolly well. They have extrapolated the local election results out into a general election score, suggesting that the gap between Labour and the Conservatives is narrower than the 20 points that the opinion polls nationally have been suggesting. Sky News have been running banner headlines today. It could be a hung parliament. Rishi Sunak saying much the same thing. You seemed in your column today to agree with that analysis, or was it just wishful thinking on your part?
Probably a bit of wishful thinking, but I mean, I'm no clearer about what's going to happen in 6 or 7 months' time than you are.
Sure.
But this is not just Rallings and Thrasher. I've had a number of very recent conversations over lunch with former senior Blairite cabinet ministers, very seasoned veteran performers. Battle-scarred as well. They've been through elections that they expected to win and failed to. And they say exactly the same thing. And this was long before the local elections, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And they were saying this is going to be much, much closer. It's much more like 1964 than it is 1979, when Wilson, who was expected to win by a landslide,
won by a handful,
by 4 votes, 4 seats. So, look, anything is possible. But I do think the key to this is that nobody is voting for Labour. They're voting against the Tories in huge numbers. There's no appetite for Starmer. There's no manifesto from Starmer. We don't know what he stands for, but whenever he stands for something, he immediately does a U-turn. And watch this space on Gaza. If they're at risk of losing seats, as they are, this principled stand in favour of Israel, watch that gradually dissolve.
Funny you say that, because he has put a statement out in the last few hours, and we'll be putting that to a Labour commentator in just a moment. As you say, a week's a long time in politics, let alone 6 or 7 months. But the Conservatives do need to win back trust, don't they?
Yes, and that's going to be very, very difficult. I mean, the trust has been shattered, and that explains everything about last week.
And stay at home and everything else.
And it almost doesn't matter what Rishi does, because that trust is so difficult to restore.
Yeah, it's going to be very hard. Well, and we've also got John Curtis coming on later, who thinks there's a 99% chance that Keir Starmer will be in number 10. Trevor Kavanagh, great to have you on. Thank you. In a moment, we continue this with a Conservative and a Labour commentator. Maybe it wasn't quite the knockout blow that Keir Starmer was really hoping for. And those divisions on the left, people voting Green, people voting for Islamist candidates, because frankly that's what they are, maybe that could be a slightly bigger problem at this election than anyone had previously thought.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I have to say, the jam issue is
It's all very WI, isn't it?
Well, it's ridiculous. Now there's a picture of a friend of hers who's lying on the grass, cuddling a bowl in which the jam is placed in the middle with lemons round it, and a dog lying next to her. So she's holding this as if it's someone else that she really loves. I think, well, Meghan would have organised that, because she'd have given her the present. I think this is too far. I mean, it's jam.
It's stupid as well.
Yes.
I mean, if any of us were to bring out a product, Isabella might associate with jam. No, I could see, I could see how that would
sticky
work.
Jam.
Yeah, but Meghan Markle, why?
Well, what was her website called? Twiggy or Tiggy?
No,
or
I've got it down
because
I can't remember. America. Oh, Tig, the Tig.
Tig. She used to be quite, a lifestyle guru pre-Harry. So she's trying to go back to look at what I'm wearing, look at what I'm eating. I can get everybody to buy my product.
And what the chickens should have in my garden.
Do you actually think jam crosses her lips?
No, of course, way too much sugar
but
in
they
there.
also say it comes from her garden. I mean, how many strawberries has she got? Does it mean 50 people, that's only enough for them? It's not going to have thousands of people asking for jam. We won't have it. And there is a thing that she was cross that, she said, jealousy, really, that King Charles brings in all the food and the jam things to make from somewhere else. He doesn't do it himself or get his staff to do it. But he gives it all the money to charity, right?
Yes, yes.
All this money is for Meghan, and it's sold out. And people have thought, well, actually, if we are going to get jam, if that's what's trendy, let's get it from the king, not from Meghan.
Not her.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I asked you, is sectarian politics here to stay? Some of your reactions. Iris says this was a local election, so let's just keep to the issues that affect the local people in these areas. Common sense, Iris, but I'm sorry to say that is now out of the window. Gordon says, I just wanted to say how fearful I am for my kids' future here in the UK. Gordon, I think that sense of unease is being felt and shared by millions. And Marion says, this country has sleepwalked into this dreadful situation. This is the start. Well, Marion, all I will say is there were 1 or 2 of us, Trevor Kavanagh, who was just here as a journalist, myself on the political stage, who've been trying for over 20 years to wake people up that irresponsible immigration, the encouragement of diversity for its own sake, would lead to problems. Now, in response to those results on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, as they filtered in. And in response to the 18 demands that have been made by the Muslim vote that have been issued directly to Keir Starmer, Starmer has responded this afternoon on X and said, with more than 1 million Palestinian civilians sheltering in Rafah, an Israeli offensive must not go ahead. There must be an immediate ceasefire, the immediate release of all hostages and unimpeded aid into Gaza that can be delivered regularly, quickly and safely. I'm joined by Stella Santakidou, who, of course, is public affairs consultant and former Labour advisor. I'm not suggesting, Stella, that at this general election, this vote is necessarily going to cause a huge problem, although there are 40 constituencies that have a Muslim population of 30% or more and a handful that are up to 50%. But long term, this is a real split on the left, isn't it?
So I agree that I think that in the next general elections, I don't think that Gaza is going to have to make an actual dent. Because if you look at George Galloway's party, which you would expect him to be able to attract most of that protest vote, he ran on almost every seat in Rochdale. He only managed to win 2 seats. And across the whole country, he only won 4 seats. So actually he didn't really perform as well as you would expect him to. Now, long term, I think this has to do with demographics. It has to do with how well we manage to integrate people. It also has to do with how the government responds to what's going on in Gaza and how the actual conflict develops. One would hope that, especially for local elections, it wouldn't be just that. Because as the person who wrote in said, you know, local elections, they're about local issues, they're important.
Yeah, but they weren't. They weren't. They were saying vote on Gaza. I had this argument on the stage in the referendum campaign with Peter Mandelson, now Lord Mandelson. And I talked about separated communities. I talked about the failures of integration, the dangers that poses, why we should be sensible. And he basically said all diversity is wonderful. That has been the Labour policy. Labour have directly got us here.
I don't know whether that's the case, because I'm in the Labour Party, and in my opinion, it is incredibly important that people speak English, that people try to assimilate, that people respect the local culture.
But they don't.
And when they don't, and when they don't, look, there are times where, because we live in a democracy, there is nothing you can do about someone who, for example, refuses to speak English unless they are, dependent on the state or in some other capacity, they're trying to work somewhere or something like that. But I think it's incredibly important.
You could say
we don't want ghettos.
You could say we're going to withhold benefits unless you go for English-speaking lessons. We can feasibly do that.
I'm not sure I would agree with that, although I can't imagine there are too many cases where someone can't speak English completely.
There are plenty in Oldham, I can promise you.
What would you do if someone was heavily disabled and that's why they were on benefits? Would you then have them... I mean, you would have a lot of practical problems.
If we don't share a language, we don't share very much.
I think I would go against some more punishing measures. I would try to find, more intervention.
I was just putting it out there. Stella, overall, on paper, a very good night for the Labour Party. But independents, Greens, Liberal Democrats, etc., this wasn't exactly an overwhelming win, was it?
For the Labour Party, definitely was. I know that the English people like to understate things, but in the Mediterranean, we overstate things in a sense. But I think they did really, really well.
Discount,
I think 24%...
You discount this poll from Runnings and Thrasher saying that Labour would get 38% of the vote on the national election.
So I don't think that you can... I don't think that you can predict the general elections from the local elections, because you're not going to get 24% of the vote for independent parties in the general election. You're not going to get the 17% of the vote for the Liberal Democrats. You will have a lot of people who will be switching from independent parties to the Labour Party. I don't think the Tories will have an equal switch. Also, at the same time, you will have a lot more people voting because a lot more people more generally vote during the election.
These were low turnout elections, and that William Atkinson, assistant editor of Con Home, the low turnout was a problem for the Conservatives, wasn't it?
To an extent. I don't think the low turnout was in any way surprising. If you mean that in the sense that Conservatives were staying at home, well, I think that's a phenomenon we've long since priced in. But I don't think the turnout in these local elections was in anywhere a departure from the norm. And remember, these same seats were, fought in 2021 with a relatively similar turnout, and the Tories did very well in them.
They did. Yeah, it's a fair point. I'm just saying, but there is a feeling amongst some Conservatives they just don't want to vote. I wonder whether that can possibly change. Let's face it, William, it was a disaster. Can you tell me why Conservative Party sources were briefing on Friday that in London, it could be that Susan Hall beat Sadiq Khan and the betting markets changed. We were also told they were very confident of hanging on to the West Midlands. Nearly 500 council seats down, one mayoralty out of 11, and that with a 20% decline. This is a very bad set of results, isn't it?
Oh, no, they're utterly appalling. I mean, I've compared it to both the ending of the fourth series of Blackadder when they go out over the top and a machine gun down, but also to the Chicxulub impact 65 million years ago, which wiped out the dinosaurs, though in this case, one or two dinosaurs might survive. I mean, this is absolutely appalling for the Conservative Party, and it means, I think, I agree with Stella, this suggests that the Conservative Party are going for a landslide record defeat to the next election. Quite frankly, their worst defeat under sort of in a modern democracy. I think since we've begun a sort of full democracy. But also, I think there is a high chance they can end up with fewer than 100 seats. This is perhaps the greatest existential crisis the Conservative Party has ever faced. And I think, quite frankly, if I was Rishi Sunak, I would hold the general election by the end of July, because if they're going to cling on for any longer, the results are only ever going to get worse.
But they believe the economy might turn around. We were told there could be a rebellion for 53 letters. None of that's happening, is it?
No, I think the most fascinating thing about the sort of response to the results is that those who were pushing for a change have basically joined with the rest of the Conservative Party in realising just how awful their fate is. Perhaps there might be a point over the next few days, once Tory MPs are back in Westminster, where that sense of resignation turns into anger. But I really don't think it's there. I think, quite frankly, the average Tory MP in a marginal constituency is now thinking about whichever lobbying job they can line up in a desperate attempt to find future employment for the next few months than they are actually
there's a lot of that going on. Yeah. And Stella, let's say that William's right, that it's going to be a rout of dramatic proportions, and it may well be an anti-Conservative vote.
Anti-establishment vote, I would say.
Well, a difficult... Sir Keir Starmer.
No, you're right. But
North London. I mean, he is establishment, isn't he?
Yeah.
Either way, whether it's anti-establishment, anti-Tory, bit of pro-Labour, if I'm a pensioner or somebody running a small business, if I'm somebody with money, how much should I fear this incoming Labour government?
The Labour government, you should welcome it for sure, because you will be looking forward for once for a stable government, and I think this is incredibly important for the country.
But tax, pensions. Well, we saw, 97. There was a hammer blow delivered to private pensions in this country.
Look, Nigel, I think we really need to tax the rich more, the billionaires especially. You know that.
They're leaving now. They're leaving now.
There is no need for anyone to be a billionaire. Unfortunately, I'm not Labour shadow chancellor. Later Leaves is not going to do that.
No.
She's going to be extremely, extremely strict, as she has been so far, and we already know that. It's the only way Labour is going to win.
I tell you what, we already have people leaving the country. It's back to 1978. We've got very wealthy people off to Dubai and elsewhere. We've got young entrepreneurs.
Bad patriots. They don't care about our country.
Well, do you know what? The Beatles left, and I remember, George Harrison wrote a song about it, and nobody would say he wasn't patriotic, but you get to a point where people say it's not worth working. And we've got young people heading off to Lisbon. Well, I think you've answered the question quite well. Not that you are the Shadow Chancellor.
Well, I will never leave you, Nigel. I will be right here campaigning for the Labour Party.
Well, that's delightful, thank you. William, Stella, thank you very much indeed. In a moment, Sir John Curtis. Now, he's the man that said there was a 99% probability that Sir Keir Starmer would end up in number 10 after the next election. How does he see this polling analysis that came out yesterday, that's been picked up by Sky News and even by Rishi Sunak, who's now talking about a hung parliament? Does any of it make any sense, or is it, as I suspect, just a load of nonsense in that you can't extrapolate out from local elections in certain parts of the country?
Hello there, welcome to your latest weather for GB News. It's becoming drier over the next 24 hours. But with light winds, we could see some fog patches tonight developing, and that's thanks to an area of high pressure moving in, which then stays with us for much of the week. Temperatures rising, particularly by the end of the week into the weekend, highs of 24 or 25 in the best of the sunshine. This evening time, still some heavy thundery showers easing away. The rain across southeast England also moves out of the way. Most places dry overnight, but that allows some mist and fog patches to form in places. Under the cloudier skies, temperatures holding up, though, around 10 or 11 Celsius. So Tuesday morning, a grey start in places, still the risk of some light rain and drizzle across central northern parts of England into southern Scotland, but it does brighten up quite quickly for most parts of the UK, best of the sunshine across southern parts of England and Wales, perhaps one or two heavy showers developing here. Later on in the afternoon, temperatures rising to around 20 or 21 degrees, a little cooler further north under the cloud, particularly Northern Ireland, southern Scotland here around about 13 or 14 Celsius. A murky start once more on Wednesday, but fog patches lifting and then dry for most, plenty of sunny spells, perhaps some low cloud just lingering around some coastal areas, but feeling warm in that sunshine as temperatures start to lift further, and more sunshine on the way to end the week as well as temperatures rise towards the mid-20s.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I thought it was 2015 this morning as we headed into that general election, because I heard a leader of the Conservative Party, a serving Prime Minister, saying, you must vote for us, otherwise there will be a coalition of chaos. There'll be Labour, Liberal Democrats, Greens, goodness knows who else. You mustn't vote for reform. That's a vote for Labour. But we've got a great expectation here, and the polls say that it could be a hung Parliament. Sky News, for some reason, seemed to pick up on that. I think it's an absolute load of nonsense. But let's speak to somebody who knows a bit more than me about these things. Indeed, polling expert and professor of politics at the University of Strathclyde, none other than Sir John Curtis. Sir John, welcome, as ever, to the programme. So it seems this poll that suggests the gap is nowhere near as big as recent national opinion polls. How have these learned men reached this conclusion?
Well, it's not a poll, Nigel. It's an extrapolation of the local election results, and it's an estimate of what, in this case, Colin Wellings and Michael Thrashall thought the outcome would be if the local elections were held everywhere and places that didn't have local elections voted in an analogous manner to those that did. And I was involved in a similar exercise at the BBC. We've all been doing this now for about 40 years. And we came to very similar conclusions. That is, Conservatives down a bit, Labour down a bit, Liberal Democrats down a little bit more, but that essentially the Labour lead over the Conservatives is much the same as it was 12 months ago, and that therefore, in line with the opinion polls, it appears that nothing much has changed. Because in a sense, the problem we've got, and this not used to be true when this kind of exercise started in the early 1980s, but that increasingly there's been a divergence between how people vote in local elections and how they vote in general elections. It started with the Liberal Democrats beginning to outpace their national standing in the late 1980s when they were in all sort of trouble with the split and then their original formation after the argument with the SDP. But then more recently, the Greens have been doing noticeably better in local elections, and even independents, it predates this election, have been doing better.
Okay.
But what you can use local elections for, and they are a good marker of still, is the ups and downs in party performance. A party that is up in the national polls tends to do better in the next round of local elections than it did in the last one. And similarly, if you're going down. And that's why I emphasize the fact that the outcome of these local elections in terms of shares of the vote is very similar to last year. And that's what's consistent with the opinion polls. Now, that said, there are a couple of very particular things about these local elections which I think, one, means that extrapolations in terms of parliamentary seats is difficult, however you do it. And secondly, why these results may actually underestimate the Conservatives' predicament. So let me take those in turn. One of the things that's very clear from these local elections, it was also there in last year's local elections, is that A, the Conservative vote is falling more heavily in places where they were previously strongest, and B, some opposition voters are voting for whichever of Labour or the Democrats is better able to defeat the Conservatives locally. That helps to explain why the Conservatives nearly lost around 500 seats, because those two patterns are disastrous if you're fighting a first-past-the-post election.
Yeah.
The second thing, however, I'm afraid slightly involves you, Nigel.
Yeah.
And that is the influence of reform. Now, reform, of course, only fought around 1 in 6 of the wards that were up for election. In the ones that they weren't up for election, basically, as already suggested, there wasn't any swing from last year. In those where there was a reform candidate, the Conservative vote went down much more markedly indeed. And this is quite fascinating. The decline in Conservative support since May 2021 in wards which reform fought was on average 19 points. What is the decline in the average standing of the Conservative Party in the polls since May 2021? It is 19 points. And of course, one of the things we know from the polls is that it is Reform, not Labour, who are now taking more votes off the Conservatives. So we shouldn't be surprised that in the absence of a Reform candidate, now maybe the Conservative Party did better than they will do in a general election if indeed your party sticks to a commitment, unlike you did back in 2019, which is to fight every single parliamentary constituency and not stand up for the Conservatives.
I did them an enormous favour. And there's a lot of people, I still believe it was the right thing at the time, but a lot of people in Reform, and I'm just the honorary president, but a lot of people in Reform say we'll never trust them again. John, fascinating as ever. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Now, this is quite a story. I wondered whether it was just a load of internet nonsense, but no, it really, really isn't. The London Fire Brigade tell us there have been, in the course of 2023, 149 fires, e-bike fires. This is the lithium batteries on the bikes catching fire, 3 people killed, 60 wounded, some very serious damage to property. Now, I can't, for a minute pretend to have any scientific knowledge about this at all. I've tended to be sceptical of this stuff when it's on the internet, but, when it comes from fire chiefs, I'm listening. So I'm joined down the line by Ewan McTurk, a battery electrochemist and a man who YouTubes on these things to help us all gain a little bit of knowledge. Ewan, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
Help. Why are these lithium batteries spontaneously combusting? What's the problem?
So with e-bikes, e-scooters, hoverboards, your kind of micromobility like that, if you buy a really cheap, nasty, poorly made e-bike off of Alibaba or something like that, there is a possibility that it's going to have a very poorly made set of batteries. The lithium battery itself might be very poorly, very poor quality internally. There could be manufacturing defects. The battery management system that keeps the thing from exploding basically could be of very poor quality. Likewise, it could be bundled with the wrong charger, which is pushing too high a voltage into the battery, and that's causing these kind of devastating scenes that you see here. That should not be conflated with a proper big brand, high quality e-bike battery. If you go for the Rallies, the Bromptons, the G-Techs of the world even, you will have a meticulously well-made battery with the correct charger for it. Don't buy cheap aftermarket chargers as well. Make sure you go for the actual proper brand one that's designed for it.
Okay.
And that will avoid these issues.
Okay, so let's just be clear about this. If you go for the high end, you go for the right product, you go for a trusted brand name, this is unlikely to happen. But then again, I have heard a couple of Lime bikes that have combusted, and presumably they're using all the best equipment.
So, yeah, Lime bikes will be designed for heavy utilisation, but it could be that they've sustained severe damage. I don't know the nature of those particular fires, but if they have been properly physically battered, like proper kind of vandalism, there's a possibility that could cause the cell to catch fire. That said, it's worth pointing out, you do need to do something incredibly stupid to get a well-designed lithium battery to catch fire. As someone who did their best when they were testing these lithium-ion cells to destruction in some of the best battery labs in the UK, I know personally just how stupid you have to be to get them to catch fire. So the line bike things will be freak incidents without a doubt. It's only, generally speaking, when you go for the cheap kind of retrofit kits and the cheap no-name brands from online. Actually, just a very quick thing as well. The Office for Product Safety and Standards are actively looking into this, and those dangerous brands that we've just talked about there, they are putting withdrawal notices on them for both in-store and online retailers to avoid this happening again.
And if people want to learn more, Ewan, about this, they can go to your YouTube channel. Where do they go?
Plug Live Television. Yeah, so I'm a consultant battery electrochemist. I've been working on and driving EVs since 2009. I'll tell you how batteries work and the best things to do with them.
Terrific. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Nigel.
On the programme.
Cheers.
Now, for a long time, for many, many years, I've been saying that the ever eastward expansion of NATO and the European Union was an unnecessary provocation against Putin and against a Russia that is paranoid because of Napoleon, Hitler and being invaded. Well, you could not be down with a feather. George Robertson, former Labour minister, but more significantly, the former Secretary-General of NATO, said to the New Statesman about Putin, he said he's not bothered about NATO or NATO enlargement, but he is bothered about the European Union. The whole Ukraine crisis started with the offer of an EU accession agreement to Ukraine in 2014. George Robertson being clear that EU expansion is the reason for the Ukraine war. I tend to think it's both, but hey, interesting that the sort of things that I've been saying and screamed and shouted at by the political class and much of the ever-so-smart mainstream media. And there's quite a heavyweight there taking a very similar opinion. In a moment, let's have some good news. I know it's a rotten, rainy, ghastly bank holiday in many ways, particularly here in the south. It's sort of day when people go to the pub. Trouble is, so many pubs have closed. Well, Heineken have announced a £39 million boost for their pubs and even the prospect of reopening over 60 that have closed. What is the view that Heineken are taking? How good a news is it for drinkers, diners and those who like to go and watch sport?
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
SUV drivers in Oxford will face higher parking charges. Proposals tabled by the local Green Party or passed by the City Council. The motion argues that heavier cars like SUVs cause more damage to roads, are more likely to seriously injure or kill pedestrians, and cause more illnesses due to pollution. However, the Alliance of British Drivers has condemned the plan as absolutely outrageous. Well, let's get the thoughts now of the legendary motoring journalist, Quentin Wilson. Quentin, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. We hear a lot about the war on motorists, this time targeting SUVs because of their weight, and the charges could be astronomical. This idea first started in Paris. Now it's coming to Oxford. Can you tell us a bit about how it would work?
OK, so the idea is that the charges will penalise people who drive heavier SUVs and I guess by implication electric cars, although Oxford Council haven't said exactly what they're going to do with EVs. But this is all based around this notion of SUVs being heavier than passenger cars, therefore wearing out the roads more. Now, there was a study, I've got it here in front of me, from the University of Edinburgh in 2022 that said real-world tests found that overwhelmingly the wear is caused by large vehicles, buses, heavy good vehicles. Road wear from cars and motorcycles is so low that this is immaterial. Now, obviously, driving around a medieval city like Oxford in an SUV isn't the brightest thing in the world to do. But the idea that we should penalise the owners of these cars based on imperfect science that's been read on social media, I think is completely wrong.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Well, one or two depressing stories at the top of the show this evening, very worrying stories for the future of our country and our communities. Let's have some good news stories, and boy, don't we need it with the number of pubs that are closed. I just think around where I live, in a very small radius of where I am, about 4 country pubs have gone over the course of the last few years. It is sad. But Heineken are saying they're going to pump in 39 million into their chain of 600 pubs. They're going to reopen potentially 62 of the pubs that have closed. They want to introduce the concept of the premium local. And from what I can see, the plans are quite a lot to do with zoning. So there'll be an area where there is just eating. There'll be a separate area where people have got, the sports on, they're watching football, cricket, rugby, whatever it may be. Can it be done? Can this be turned around? Are Heineken right? I'm joined down the line by Victoria MacDonald, National Executive Committee of the Campaign for Pubs and landlady of 3 pubs. Victoria, the old-fashioned boozer, where people go in, drink, you might get a cheese roll on a good day, but it'll be 3 days old. I mean, that very, very few places like that. can survive. It seems that the pubs that Heineken own are mostly in small town stroke suburbia, and their argument is that the pubs, the decor, are out of date, that if they're themed and zoned, there could be a comeback of this idea of the premium local. Do you think in some way Heineken may have this right?
Well, as you said right at the start, there are hundreds of pubs closing, and anything that supports bringing the pub back into communities has to be applauded. But in this case, it has to be with a very large pinch of salt. What we have to remember is that Heineken is a very, very large pub company, that what we're looking at really is a collection of kit pubs, which will be tenanted. They will be run under their banner. Their tenants will have to buy their beers from them. So we're looking at tied models. It would be interesting to see what they're, are they going to take percentages from the managed houses that they're creating? We don't know what model this is. And we're not really talking about the classic pub run by quality landlords who offer exactly what local community needs.
All right, so it's a little bit unclear. And for those tenants who have to buy the drinks from the brewery, and they've got to pay significant rents, very tough to earn a living.
Oh, massively, absolutely massive. I mean, we've had the government hailing recently, they did last year, we spoke about it last year, and this year saying, oh, well, we're supporting pubs by cutting duty. Well, as we know, duty is something that only supports producers. Heineken did put their prices up this year. For example, Stonegate tenants have seen a 4.25% increase in beer. And that's on top of paying almost double what it is available on the free market. So where the margins are very tight, you put that alongside increases that we've had in energy costs. And whilst, we all love our staff and we'd love to pay them appropriately, the forced increase in minimum wage has had implications. We need other support. And Heineken is one of the big boys. They're fine. Their profit margins and their shareholders, I'm sure, are sitting very, very pretty. They will not be worrying about the tenants running those 60-odd pubs that they are planning to open.
All right, well, Victoria MacDonald, you've spoilt my bank holiday. I was trying to have a happy story, but it wasn't quite as good as it looked on the face of it.
Then get down to your local, proper local.
Absolutely. After this, I will. I promise. Thank you. Oh, I really did try, folks. I really wanted to try and cheer everybody up, but it just simply hasn't worked. Now, somebody who's enjoying the rain in Somerset today is Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. So State of the Nation will be presented tonight by my former colleague, Martin Daubney, and we served together in the European Parliament, of course, Martin, which seems like many years ago. What have you got coming up on the show this evening?
So after their electoral wipeout at the locals, are the Conservatives right-wing enough? Suella Braverman says they should go in that direction. Andy Street, who of course lost, said they must remain in the centre. Andrea Jenkins says it's rubbish to suggest we must go to the centre. What's the track back to victory? Should they go to the right?
Damien Green was on the Today programme on Radio 4 this morning, saying we're losing seats to parties on the left, therefore we mustn't move at all to the right. And Suella Braverman, she actually said they'd be lucky to win any seats at the next election.
Total wipeout with doing that. And of course today, Ireland is full. There was a massive protest in Dublin. GB News was the only channel that was there talking to locals live. We're going to speak to one of the representatives, one of the organisers of that. 50% of the Irish, can you believe this, want border checks. Do you remember they never wanted any form of border? Now, half of them are woken up to the fact that mass migration is a huge problem. 1 million migrants have gone to Ireland, and Ireland, of course, of only 5-6 million.
Yeah, and in recent times, they've been coming in from Belfast, not prior to that. I did think the Irish were using us a bit of a scapegoat, but clearly there's a problem. Isn't it funny? We could see border checks back on the island of Ireland, but that's OK. There'll be no terrorism if it's done by the Irish government. I guess that's what they're saying. Which,
of course, they said they never wanted. But there's a big election coming in June, and so are they changing their tunes? Of course, sectarian politics. Nigel, you called that early. You called it right. As ever, we'll be covering that.
There is far too much of it. Folks, I will be back with you tomorrow evening, live, here on GB News, at 7 o'clock in this very chair. But first, the weather. Can it get better, Greg Dewhurst?
Looks like things are heating up. Boxt Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest weather for GB News. It's becoming drier over the next 24 hours, but with light winds we could see some fog patches tonight developing, and that's thanks to an area of high pressure moving in, which then stays with us for much of the week. Temperatures rising, particularly by the end of the week into the weekend, highs of 24 or 25 in the best of the sunshine. This evening time, still some heavy thundery showers easing away. The rain across southeast England also moves out of the way. Most places dry overnight, but that allows some mist and fog patches to form in places. Under the cloudier skies, temperatures holding up though around 10 or 11 Celsius. So Tuesday morning, a grey start in places, still the risk of some light rain and drizzle across central northern parts of England into southern Scotland, but it does brighten up quite quickly for most parts of the UK. Best of the sunshine across southern parts of England and Wales, perhaps one or two heavy showers developing here. Later on in the afternoon, temperatures rising to around 20 or 21 degrees. A little cooler further north under the cloud, particularly Northern Ireland, southern Scotland here around about 13 or 14 Celsius. A murky start once more on Wednesday, but fog patches lifting and then dry for most, plenty of sunny spells, perhaps some low cloud just lingering around some coastal areas, but feeling warm in that sunshine as temperatures start to lift further, and more sunshine on the way to end the week as well as temperatures rise towards the mid-20s.
A brighter outlook with Boxt Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Hi, my name's Phil Cox, and I won the Great British Giveaway. I'd say, why not? What is it? The price of a text and £2 to enter. And if I can win it, anybody can win it. And they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News. The People's
Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
A very good evening to you. I'm Martin Daubney, filling in for Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg on State of the Nation tonight. The Tory party faced an electoral wipeout over the weekend, with the party losing hundreds of seats across the country. But the outgoing Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, has warned against the party's drift to the right. But is he right? Next, more protests have unfolded in Ireland, with hundreds of people protesting against the increase in migrants, declaring Ireland is full. But will the Irish government heed the concerns of their citizens? And are we seeing the rise of sectarian politics in Britain? And is this what you typically expect from a victorious Green Party councillor?
We will not be silent. We will raise the voice of Gaza. We will raise the voice of Palestine. Allahu Akbar!
Oh, I love my Greens. Plus, an African king who negotiated the loan of V&A artefacts has said he wants them permanently. But the British acquisition